Welcome, everyone, to the Holy Sparks podcast. Salke here, super excited and grateful for yet another amazing guest. I'm super excited for this guest. He's a good friend of mine. And without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce and edify the man properly. Zack Bodner, author and president and CEO of the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto, California. Zack Bodner is the author of the book Why Do Jewish? A Manifesto for 21st Century Jewish Peoplehood, an Amazon #1 bestseller, new release, Jewish Life and Religion and Philosophy. Why Do Jewish takes one of our oldest wisdom traditions and provides an accessible roadmap for anyone looking for answers to life's most important questions. Zack serves as the president and CEO of the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto. Under Zack's leadership, the JCC began hosting an annual conference called Zionism 3.0, which became the Z3 Project, a global effort to reimagine diaspora-Israel relations. Before joining the JCC, Zack served as 14 years as the Pacific Northwest Regional Director of AIPAC. Zack holds a master's degree in philosophy of religion and theology from Claremont Graduate University. He earned his bachelor degree from Yale University, studied at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and Stanford Business School's program for executives in nonprofit leadership. Zack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Saul. It's great to be here. And thank you for reading that resume that my mother is very proud of. Appreciate that.
She should be. It's quite impressive. Okay, so let's get to it. So in your book, which I love, by the way, I read it in 4 days. It was like having a nice long conversation with you. I really appreciated the tone of it. You talk about your Jewish upbringing. So just share some of that with our audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate you being one of the few to read it. I do think that it's actually been surprising for me at how well received it's been. And we can talk a little bit about that as well. But I grew up in Southern California as a very cultural Jew, a very Zionistic Jew, but very Reform. My parents were members of a local Reform synagogue. I went to Hebrew school just long enough to have my bar mitzvah. And then when I had to choose between soccer practice or confirmation class afterwards, I definitely chose soccer. It was not a tough decision for me, Saul. And growing up, my family was very much Jewish culturally. So we had Shabbat dinners, Friday nights, but we didn't keep kosher. We didn't keep Shabbos. My father and I would argue about whether or not I should be going to school dances on Friday nights. And he's, look, as long as you come to the Shabbat dinner, afterwards, fine, but it was a big discussion. For me, growing up was a lot about, though, what I couldn't do as a Jew. I couldn't go out on Friday nights for a long time. We couldn't have pepperoni pizza in the house. We couldn't own a German Shepherd or a German car. That was big for my father, right? That was of that generation. So we had our own way of doing kosher. Like pepperoni pizza outside the house suddenly became kosher, but inside the house, no. But we were very Zionistic, very culturally Jewish. It was like all about Borscht Belt humor, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, all about the pastrami and the matzo balls. And my parents co-led the first BBY international team toward Israel. So Zionism was a big part of our lives. But that's what it meant for me growing up as a Jewish kid in Southern California, going to public school. And it was only when I took that first trip to Israel when I was a teenager, this was way before Birthright, but it was like an 8-week summer trip that my mind was blown. And I fell in love with Israel and the Jewish people. And I knew this is who I am and what I want to be a part of for the rest of my life. So that kind of led me on to the rest of my Jewish journey.
I love it. I love it. I only found out pepperoni pizza wasn't kosher in my 20s.
Exactly.
I have a lot in common with that California upbringing for sure. So after getting your master's in religion and theology from Claremont, did you feel like you were headed towards a rabbinic track? Was that part of your derech?
Good question. I thought I might head towards the rabbinic track. And sometimes I look back and I still wonder if I made a mistake by not going that route. It's always had an allure for me. I've always had a great appreciation for the learning. I did study in a yeshiva in Jerusalem for a little while, and the study was just something that fascinated me. I wasn't as drawn to the liturgy and the daily prayer side of Judaism at the time, but that didn't matter. I thought I could learn a lot from going to rabbinic school. But I had an advisor in grad school who actually said, look, you want to make an impact in Israel? You want to do Israel-related stuff? Go on for the PhD rather than the rabbinic smicha, because she said, you're going to have to pick a denomination. And at the time, I was agnostic about denominations, and I still kind of am. I bounce in and out of different synagogues and different spaces that are affiliated with different movements. I'm not really attached to one or the other. I'm a member of multiple synagogues here in this Silicon Valley that I don't regularly attend. I recognize that she was probably right, that I was going to have to pick one of these denominations and it may lose some credibility in the eyes of others. And in Israel, especially as at the time then, and they're getting a little better now, there was not a great appreciation for pluralistic, non-Orthodox Jewish life in Israel at the time, and definitely rabbis. So I chose to go the graduate school route. Never finished the PhD, but did have a very fulfilling experience that route. But still, I do look back sometimes, Saul, and wonder, should I have gone? And maybe it's not too late. Maybe one day, like you, my friend.
It's not too late. So one of your longest tenures was at AIPAC. And so what I wanted to ask you, what did you like most about working with AIPAC? And then what are you most proud of your tenure there?
Yeah, I loved working at AIPAC. I started at AIPAC in early 2000. And at the time, I was working in the San Francisco office. It was a very small office, 4 people, and it was a very small operation. AIPAC was like a $12 million organization nationwide at the time. That was it. And this was on the eve of the peace process breaking out. If you could bring yourself back to February of 2000, we were on the eve of Barack and Arafat and Clinton going to Camp David, and it was going to be peace. And at the time, AIPAC was working on the talking points for what was going to be the biggest peace package ever in American history to make this peace deal go through, right? A two-state solution, end of conflict, Palestinian refugees, sharing Jerusalem, all the final status stuff, right? It's very hard to remember now, 24 years ago. But we were going around talking this up in the community, being branded as a crazy liberal left-wing organization. Okay, think about that. AIPAC.
Some people that don't actually know what that stands for, so just break it down real quick.
Oh yeah, good. Thank you. AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And AIPAC is a political lobbying organization based in Washington, D.C., and their only job is to support the U.S.-Israel relationship. That's it. They support the U.S.-Israel relationship no matter who is in office, Republican or Democrat here, Likud or Labor or Meretz or Kahol Lavan, and it doesn't matter. Like, their whole thing is support the U.S.-Israel relationship. And so that means it looks like it can ping pong depending on politically who is in office, especially in Israel. And for the last 23 years, there has been a right-leaning government in power. But at the time, in early 2000, it was Ehud Barak, and he was looking to make peace with the Palestinians. And so the peace deal would have been far-reaching that many members of the community thought that AIPAC was crazy left-wing for going along with this dividing Jerusalem and giving control of the Temple Mount to the Palestinians and letting in Palestinian refugees, right? That's what it was at the time, Saul. And then we know that by the fall of that year, the Second Intifada was launched and everything turned on its head. And frankly, for 23 years now, Israel has been looking at that going, where do we go from here? So it became a 24/7 job at that point. And we were going around the community helping build Israel action committees at local synagogues, helping build a rapid response team to deal with the anti-Israel stuff in the newspapers and the radios. This was all before social media on the internet has gone crazy. And I remember very clearly being in my office in downtown San Francisco in the fall of 2000, and there was a bunch of noise outside. I looked out my window, and going down Market Street was this huge anti-Israel rally. And I'm not saying pro-peace, pro-Palestinian rally. It was anti-Israel. The chants were anti-Israel. It was from the river to the sea. They were burning Israeli flags in the streets of San Francisco. So my colleague Elliot and I went down there, and it was so heartbreaking that I remember picking up the charred remains of this Israeli flag and bringing it back to the office and hanging it up on the wall as a reminder of, like, this is what we're fighting for peace, for righteousness, for the Jewish state to have the right to self-defense. So at the time, I loved being in the fight. I loved feeling like this was I was doing my job to help the Jewish people. I was doing Miloim, my Army Reserve duty as an American Jew. And for almost 15 years, I felt really good about that work. The thing I'm most proud of was helping grow the organization, helping ensure that it stayed as a grassroots bipartisan movement. Being here in liberal Northern California, my territory went from Central California all the way to Alaska, and some red areas in there, of course, but it's pretty blue up here. But we had the top leaders in the Democratic and Republican parties, grassroots and leadership involved with the organization at the time. We raised a lot of money. We hired a lot of people, opened a satellite office in Seattle. And I was really proud of the growth and the work that we had done to show that this is an important organization for ensuring that the Jewish people have a seat at the table in the American power structure. And that's what AIPAC was ensuring.
Interesting. Okay. And why is AIPAC important now? And what do you think they're doing best right now?
Well, I think they're important for the same reasons, right? They're ensuring that in the American political landscape, that Israel's defenders are being represented in the halls of Congress, right? To recognize that there are 435 members of Congress, 100 US senators, and probably another 500 or so people in the foreign policy establishment in Washington, D.C. So roughly 1,000 people in Washington, D.C. who are determining the future of the Jewish state. They are making decisions on a daily basis that determine whether or not Israel receives the diplomatic support of the United Nations, the financial support, the military aid, that they're able to fight back against terrorists who storm their borders and kidnap and rape and torture their people. If America's leadership did not support Israel the way they do, think about the pressure that Israel would be facing from, like they are from the rest of the world. So AIPAC is there in the halls of Congress ensuring that our legislators understand the nuances, understand the detail, and understand how to get involved with the tachlis. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars a year that these 435 members of Congress and 100 senators ensure that Israel receives every year. So that's why AIPAC's role is important, right? They're not about taking positions on internal matters. So there was always criticism of AIPAC for not criticizing the settlement expansion or not criticizing. Pick your issue, Saul, that people are not happy as American Jews that Israel is doing this or that. The leadership that's sitting in the Israeli government right now, there's a lot of American Jews that are frustrated by that. And Israel, AIPAC always felt, you know what, Israel's going to have to work that stuff out. But we're going to make sure that the U.S. government stands with Israel, no matter who's in office, no matter what decisions they make. And that's still a really important role in my mind.
Absolutely. Okay, so speaking of U.S. congressional things, this just came up. The House of Representatives passed a resolution condemning from the river to the sea chant. What does that actually mean, in your opinion? Is that even useful, and if so, why?
From the river to the sea is a chant that anti-Israel activists use to talk about the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, that entire territory becoming a Palestinian state. That's not a call for a two-state solution. So that's not pro-Israel, pro-peace. That's not even free Palestine. Because you can make the argument that free Palestine means freeing part of Palestine, free Palestine from Hamas, but from the river to the sea means let's turn this entire place into a Palestinian state. When you say that, it means that you don't believe that Israel or any part of Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. And if you don't believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, but that all other people in the world have a right to their own state, except for the Jews, that is anti-Semitic. Treating the Jews differently than anyone else. And we know, we have a term for that, right? So you can't say the French deserve a state, the Germans deserve a state, the Saudis and the Iranians and the Palestinians deserve a state, but not the Jews. The Jews are the only people in the world that do not deserve a state. And that's what anti-Zionism is. That's what from the river to the sea is. And so that's why it's an anti-Semitic comment. It doesn't mean you can't criticize Israel, their policies, their actions, what's happening in Gaza, of course. But to say that Jews don't have a right to a state the way that all other people do is actually anti-Semitic.
Agreed. I guess my question is also, Congress passes these resolutions. What is the tachlis of that? Does that mean people are going through the streets chanting that? They have to stop? They have to put down the signs? Or what does that actually mean?
It's going to allow for the following steps that come afterwards, right? Like it's, in my mind, it's putting out there something that says, okay, if this is hateful language, then it's criminalizing the steps that come after that come from that, right? It's not okay in this country to put a swastika on someone else's house, right? It's not okay to use certain signs of hate, to use certain language of hate. And once something is deemed as a hate incident, you can take certain measures. Then something is deemed as a hate crime, you can take certain measures. If something is deemed as anti-Semitic, like a saying from the river to the sea, okay, so there are different ramifications for what happens after that point. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, Saul, so I don't know what the legislators are going to do with that. I don't know if it's going to tamp down free speech, quote unquote. But I know that what's happening on college campuses, for instance, my daughter's at Columbia as we speak, and by not tamping down on the virulent anti-Semitism, it's emboldened the haters, and they've stepped up more and more of their action to the point where they're intimidating and even assaulting young Jewish kids on college campuses, and that's not okay. So sometimes you have to pull it out from the root, and I think that's what they were trying to do in this case.
Yes, agreed. And just for the record, Protesters don't even know what river they're talking about or sea they're talking about. They're just jumping on the trend. Okay, moving forward, question about the JCC. So this is where you are now. It's where you found yourself for the last several years. What is your vision of the place of a JCC in the tapestry of Jewish life and community?
Oh, I love that. I think that JCC in many ways can be the center of Jewish life. And obviously it's going to be different in every single community. And in some communities, synagogues are going to continue to be the center. In some communities, it'll be a federation. In some communities, it'll be a virtual experience. It'll be a podcast of sorts. So in some communities, it will be a new little upstart organization, a Wilderness Torah or an Urban Adamah, or maybe it's a Moishe House, or maybe it's a youth group, a BBYO, it's Ophim, a Hillel experience. But in most cases, there needs to be some sort of physical center, and it's a place from which there can be Jewish life. It has to be welcoming to everybody, those who are believers and non-believers, those who are Orthodox and those who are secular. And it has Jews and non-Jews, people of all ages and backgrounds. And that's why I think a JCC has an opportunity to be the epicenter of Jewish life in many communities, because it's like a microcosm of Israel, if you think about it, Saul. It's a Jewish home. It's a Jewish place that welcomes Jews and non-Jews, and it has all spectrums of belief and practice. And so JCCs that are thinking about the role they play Jewishly, I think are doing that. Now, some JCCs are seen in communities as, oh, it's just a great gym, or it's a great camp, or a great school. And that's awesome. That's phenomenal. And then maybe it's because the synagogues are so strong in that community, or maybe it's because some other organization like we talked about is so strong. But I think at least here in Silicon Valley, our JCC in Palo Alto has played a really prominent role, because we've been willing to try to be the architects of the Jewish future. That's our vision, is to be the architects of the Jewish future, to think about things a different way. And we have a huge Israeli contingent here. The consulate thinks that there are about 50,000 Israeli expats living in the Bay Area, about 30,000 of whom are down here, and all of them come here. They come here every single year. We see about 30,000 different Israelis coming through our doors. So they see us as a home away from home. And we do programming in Hebrew. We bring them into the community at large. We have leadership programs that allow them to learn what it means to be part of the American Jewish community. We have a Hebrew language school that has 700 kids all over the Bay Area learning Hebrew as a second language. And we do holidays and rituals and celebrations. And that's part of what it means to do Jewish today, Saul, is acknowledging that half of our family is living in Israel, these Israelis, and they experience Judaism a little bit differently than we do in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think it's really a shining example of Jewish pluralism in practice. It really is, being a hub. And I love that about that. What do you see in the future for JCCs in terms of their role, and maybe changing role or expanding? Any thoughts about that?
I think the role of the JCC is going to become even more important in the future, because as the U.S. Surgeon General has said, we are experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. Okay, this is coming out of COVID, but it was happening before COVID. But we're experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. You and I both know a lot of people personally, and we know in our community, there are people who are suffering from depression, isolation, anxiety, these things that stem from loneliness. And the antidote to loneliness is community. And so if JCCs can be on the forefront of being the antidote to loneliness by helping people create community, by giving you a culture, a sense of belonging. These are your people. This is your family. This is where you can come to just hang out. It's where you can come for a class. Maybe it's a meditation class led by Saul K. Maybe it's a learning and a Talmud class. Maybe it's just a show. Maybe it's not anything overtly Jewish at all. When my grandfather and my dad were back in New Jersey in the day, they would go hang out with the Jewish guys in the Schwitz at the JCC. So it wasn't even an overtly Jewish thing. They'd go play basketball there, but hanging out with the other Jewish guys, that was their community. That was the antidote to their loneliness. And today, as so much moves online, as so much of our world is virtual, I mean, you and I are sitting across from each other, but we're really in computer space, in virtual reality. It's going to be so much more important for people to have real life in-person relationships, and JCCs can do that. Whether it's their wellness centers, whether it's the swimming pool or a Pilates class or a group exercise program, or whether it's a Shabbat dinner, whether it's a preschool classroom. So this is how I think of the future of JCCs. Can you come here and make a friend? Can we help you make a friend? We are in the friendship business at the end of the day. So that's the future of JCCs in my mind.
I love it. I was literally just talking with our friend Tova today after meditating about this concept of all these Jewish organizations, some of them are brilliant at content. They're brilliant at programming, right? And yet, if that programming doesn't lead to connections between people that come to those programs, it's a one and done. I think that's something JCC does well. It provides all the content programming, but it's like the schmooze afterwards are real.
That's right.
Community really gets solidified.
We like to say, come for the show, stay for the schmooze.
I love it. So many topics to cover over here. I really enjoyed reading your book, as I mentioned, Why Do Jewish? A Manifesto for 21st Century Jewish Peoplehood. So tell us, what inspired you to write it, and what is your hope and vision for it moving forward?
Thank you. First of all, I wrote it during the first 6 months of COVID because, like you and everyone else, we were working from home. And what happened is I started working all the time. There was no separation, right? I was just like, whenever there was a down moment, I'd pop open the laptop. My wife and I had an ongoing joke. Are we working from home or are we living at work? Because whenever there was a down moment, and it was like, it was too much. It actually led to me having a Shabbat ritual coming out of this because I realized I needed the cleanse. But I realized also at a certain point, I couldn't keep sending my staff emails at 12 o'clock at night or 1 in the morning. It wasn't nice. It's not nice, but I was working, I was busy. So I had to channel my energies differently. And I always had this, not always, but I think for the last 10 years, I've wanted to write a book. I've had a lot of ideas and thoughts and a lot of learnings from my past 3 decades as a Jewish professional. I've met a lot of interesting people. And so I just started putting some of these ideas down and it just kept coming. And it went from me writing in the middle of the night to me making some time during the day. And in a 6-month period, this book came out of me. And it really, as you said in the intro, it's really meant to be like a roadmap, a guide for people who are looking for meaning in their lives, who have an inkling that maybe this ancient wisdom tradition, Judaism, has something to say about this moment. Maybe it's for these families that had a kid who went through a JCC preschool or a synagogue preschool. And now the Jewish just became too much in their lives because of basketball or soccer or dance or something. And so they miss it. They're like, oh, I miss doing Shabbat on a Friday, or I miss the holidays. So this was giving people an easy roadmap for how to do Jewish. And that's really the terminology I chose because as a JCC exec, I don't really care if your mother converted or not. Like, I don't care if you are or are not Jewish. I want you to do Jewish. I want to bring you here, welcome you, hug you with open arms, and show you the incredible beauty of Shabbat. Show you what a Passover Seder means this coming week, Saul, as we celebrate the Jews' exodus from Egypt, exodus from slavery, liberation, freedom. And we talk about, what does that mean today? What are you trying to free yourself from? The symbolism of liberation. What in your life is holding you in chains? And of course, talking about the real life hostages who are still today, the Israeli hostages who don't have their freedom. But there's Jewish meaning. There's human value in these ideas that Jewish wisdom tradition has passed down. And we can have people do that Jewish, no matter whether they're Jewish or not. And I wanted people to get that from the book.
Someone said the other day, Judaism isn't a religion of beliefs, which I don't 100% agree with, but the second part I do agree with. It said Judaism is a religion of action.
That's right.
It's doing. And also, I will say this, your book is a great, for people that aren't familiar with things like Lag BaOmer or these other minor fest celebrations, it's a great tour de force through the whole Jewish calendar. I really appreciate that about that.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say about the book?
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be so obscure that you have to jump right into the holiday of Lag BaOmer or the fast of Gedalia. But I wanted people to understand that there are a lot of holidays out there that mean different things, that represent different values. And if you want more meaning in your life, you don't have to go making it up. You can find it in this incredible wisdom tradition, to the point of every month you can embrace some other values. So the chapter on holidays that you're talking about really did speak to how each month there's something out there that even for kids who are younger, even for folks who don't have a really deep knowledge of Jewish life, you can do something meaningful with it, right? Sukkot, I love this, the holiday of Sukkot, because it doesn't just have to remind us that we were wandering in the desert and putting up temporary dwellings. It can help people think about how, not everyone has a roof over their head today. Not everyone has food security. So how do we make Sukkot meaningful and relevant for our kids today by teaching them those lessons? And that's what I wanted to do with the holiday section of the book.
I love it. It's a great read. Highly recommend it. Talk about a little bit the Z3 conference and really the impacts that you've seen it have on the community where you are.
Okay, so Z3 is short for Zionism 3.0. And Zionism 3.0 is this notion that we are in the third era of Zionism. If Zionism 1.0 was the pre-1948 Zionism of Theodor Herzl, it was if you will it is no dream, right? Like the idea that we needed a country to help Jews be safe from all the Jew hatred around the world. Okay, we have a country in 1948. That led to Zionism 2.0, which is the upbuilding of the state. It's the Zionism that was defined by this ethos of diaspora negation, that you need to move to Israel. And if you don't have the chutzpah to move to Israel, at least those of you Jews in the diaspora who are staying there, you get to support us, but you have a stake but no say. You get to support us financially, diplomatically. So just be quiet and keep supporting us because we need your help. And roughly around the turn of the century, what I started to observe is, you know what? Israel's pretty strong. Israel's pretty stable. The Jewish community in the diaspora, and mainly in North America, is also pretty strong and pretty stable. It was Achad Ha'am's vision of, right? There's a hub and spoke model, but we have these two centers of Jewish life. How are we now going to relate to each other, Saul? We need to create a new paradigm where it's not just the rich American uncle of the old Zionism 2.0. How do we take these two thriving centers of Jewish life and have them help each other, contribute to each other, add to the richness, and listen to each other? Right? We've become, I don't know, the old paternalistic way of wagging our finger at each other. We're still in that mode where American Jews will look at Israel and wag their finger and say, what are you doing to the poor Palestinians? Or how dare you have Ben Gvir in your government? Or look how you're treating Arab Israelis, right? There's so much judgment coming from Americans towards Israel. And meanwhile, Israelis are looking at us going, look, you're not even going to be Jewish in a generation, anti-Semitism, assimilation, intermarriage. So we're talking past each other. And the notion is we need a new way to engage with each other. That's the Zionism 3.0, this third era of Zionism. So we launched a conference 10 years ago now that was in the early days meant to just bring together the left and the right, the Orthodox and the secular. It was meant to bring together all sides of the spectrum to have a conversation. And it evolved over time so that it could become this movement to try and reimagine diaspora-Israel relations. And now we have these three principles where we bring people together to help think differently and change a mindset. The first principle is a diversity of voices. We always need to have represented around the table people that represent the left, the right, the Orthodox, the secular, Israeli, and American. We need to have different voices. We can't just keep talking at ourselves. The second principle is this notion of engaging as equal partners. I don't like these American Jewish conferences where we're going to tell the Israelis how they need to fix things with the Palestinians. Meanwhile, Israelis are having their conferences in Hebrew that Americans can't even understand, where they're telling us how to fix our anti-Semitism problem. Those days are gone. We need to engage as equal partners. And the third principle is unity, not uniformity. We need to recognize that our people have never, ever been uniform, ever, since Joseph and his brothers, right? We've always disagreed. You're a Chacham Talmud. You understand. You remember Hillel and Shammai couldn't even agree on how to light Hanukkah candles. Our people, in our darkest moment during the Shoah, you had the Jewish partisan fighters in the forests trying to save Jews, and the Jews who were serving on the Jewish councils that were trying to save Jewish lives, and they hated each other. In the founding of the Jewish state, the Irgun and the Haganah, the two underground Israeli armies, were fighting each other and killing each other, right? We've never agreed, Saul. There's never been a moment of uniformity, but unity is paramount. So we have to recognize that there are things that transcend our different political and religious opinions. This is bigger than the religiousness or the political. And that's not to say we should take those differences and brush them under the rug. They're real differences. The politics, the religion, real differences, and we need to address them. But we need to address them from a different place, a place of coming together as brothers and sisters, as siblings, as family, because we really are mishpacha. And that's the notion of the Zionism 3.0 project and what we're trying to do. There's ways that we're trying to do it. I can get into that, but that's the overall concept of what it's all about.
I love it. And maybe you can give one or two examples of how you've seen its impact in the last 10 years. I've personally experienced it going to the conference, but maybe in the community or a larger community.
Yeah, so it started with a conference, as I mentioned, and we still do an annual conference. And then it led to events happening all year round. And one of the things that happened early on is that people said, hey, you guys in liberal Northern California, you're proudly embracing the word Zionism. You're using the term Zionism. Can you help us do that? Can you teach us how to do that in our own community? Because Israel is toxic or Israel is divisive. And so what we're finding is that a lot of rabbis even weren't even talking about, they've stopped talking about Israel from the Bima. They just were like, look, if I talk about it, I'm going to upset this right-wing donor or this left-wing donor. If I bring in this speaker, these people are going to protest or these people, right? So they were just avoiding it altogether. And you were getting a generation of people who didn't know anything about Israel because they just weren't being taught it by their leaders. And then for others, it became a partisan issue. And so when we started doing it here in the Bay Area, we had a lot of people saying to us, can you come teach us how to do that in our town? So we launched something about 5 years ago called the Z3 Leadership Lab, where we bring people from all over the country who lead different organizations. And they stay for our conference and they stay for another couple of days, and we give them a crash course on how to bring this idea to their town in whatever way works for them. It's not a cookie cutter approach. They're not all going to do a conference. Some might make it part of their thesis statement, their vision statement for their JCC, as our friends in Tucson have. Some may have turned it into a film festival. Some did do a conference, like our friends in Austin. Others down in San Diego did it a different way, and Brooklyn did it a different way. So folks in Florida are doing their own way of bringing Zionism to that community. So what's been exciting to see is how folks have been able to re-embrace the word Zionism, have been able to bring into the same room people who are on opposite sides politically of the Israel issue, but they recognize some things transcend that. And that's been really rewarding. The other thing is we've recognized that there's a need for thought leadership on this. We just are launching the Z3 Institute. Our latest endeavor is we hired David Hazoni to work for Amitai Freeman. Amitai Freeman is the Z3 director, and he's going to launch our Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities. And it's a way to think about, use language, ideology, framework around Jewish peoplehood, Jewish ideas, diaspora-Israel relations. And what's unique about it, Saul, is that to have a think tank in the framework of a JCC, think about it this way. You have medical schools that have teaching hospitals, so they can match the think tank with the do tank. We are having a think tank with a do tank. Most think tanks are policy oriented. They're trying to come up with policy to get implemented in Washington, D.C. or state capitals to change legislation. We're grassroots. We're about how does our think tank come up with a big idea that gets published in a book, but then the book takes it and breaks it down into deployable playbooks. And we try it out in our camp. We try it out in our preschool. We try it out in our after-school care. We try it out with our cohort programs, and then we tweak it and we send it back to the drawing board. But that's the think tank, do tank model that we're really excited about with the Z3 Institute that we're just launching.
I love it. I definitely want to find out more about that. And is that something that's open to the public or by invitation only, or is there a follow-up that people could do about that?
Yeah, the Z3 project's open for everyone. The events are open, the conference is open, there's a website we can definitely lead people to, and then you can figure out how to bring it to your own community for folks who aren't local. But yeah, we're open to everybody and of all different backgrounds and beliefs.
Okay, love it. So the next question, which could be 6 episodes of this podcast, and it's since our last time speaking, it's evolved, right? So given the current situation with the war in Israel, hostages, raging anti-Semitism, what do you recommend for people, A, as a model of caring for the self in this challenging time? Because I know that you deal a lot with that in a very pluralistic community. And B, any thoughts about the way forward?
Big questions. Yeah, as it relates to the first question on self-care, this is an example of do as I say, not as I do. I'm not as good at this as I should be. And I just heard somebody say recently, as a way to make me feel better, vis-a-vis self-care, don't should all over yourself. So this idea of I should do this and I should do that, they're like, don't should all over yourself, which I thought was very funny and clever.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help with the self-care, but I know I should be better at this. But yes, I'm finding that a daily meditation practice is helpful. It's something I started many years ago. You've helped me refine the practice, but just a centering, an ability to focus on breath, an ability to recognize what I actually do have control over and what I don't have control over, and practicing releasing the anxiety around things I can't control. And I'm not very good at it, Saul, but I'm getting better. But I think self-care is really important. As I mentioned before, having some sort of Shabbat ritual, some sort of unplugging. I'm not Shomer Shabbos with my family, but I definitely don't do the cell phone on Shabbat. I got to schlep the kids around to soccer and as we talked about. But I think that turning off the tech has been very helpful for me mentally. And I think just having some boundaries, setting boundaries on when I'm going to turn off the news, when I'm going to stop seeing the images. I after the first couple of weeks after October 7th, I had to stop looking at the horrific images. And I saw especially the Israelis who work for me here at the JCC, they to this day haven't stopped. 6 months in, every day is still October 7th for them. They're still in trauma. They haven't even gotten to PTSD because they're still in it because everybody's been affected. Everybody knows somebody who was killed or kidnapped or has a kid who's serving in the army. So they can't let it go. It's horribly painful for them. But self-care involves, at least for me, knowing how and when to unplug sometime and just stop looking at the images because it's not helpful to me. Um, how this plays out, the second question, I'm not around that table. I don't know. I feel like, thankfully, this is one of the areas I am working on for my self-care, which is reminding myself that I don't have to have the answer to that question. There's a lot smarter people that are doing this, fortunately. And I hope it ends with the hostages coming home sooner rather than later. I hope it ends with Hamas having been defanged, because they will do this again and again if they are not. And that's what it means to destroy Hamas, by the way, not to destroy. The ideology will always be there, but to take away their military capability is what Israel has to do. And to also defang Iran. I think what Iran has done is launched a war on Israel. So I actually don't think the language right now of tit for tat, is Israel going to quote unquote strike back from Iran strike? I don't think that's the right way to think about it. I think Iran launched a war 6 months ago and Israel's in that war. And there's going to be steps forward and steps backwards. And this language of don't test them. Iran has done what they need to do. And if Israel strikes back, Iran is going to get even crazier. That's the definition of appeasement, right? Like you don't not defend yourselves because you're worried that the action you're going to take is going to have ramifications. This is what Israel's trying to get back its hostages, and they're going to stop at nothing. And if you or I, God forbid, Has v'Chalila, had one of our kids taken, we would stop at nothing to get our children back. So for the world to say, Israel, you should stop because it's causing pain, without Hamas saying, okay, we'll give the kids back, it's not right. If the world really cared about the Palestinians, the world would say, Hamas, give the kids back, give the hostages back, and then we can have a ceasefire. But by just telling Israel to stop trying to get its innocent hostages back, that's not right. So I'm hoping that's how this ends. And I hope it ends quicker rather than later, but your guess is as good as mine.
Okay. So 2 final questions, each of which is a book and a 10-part miniseries. Okay.
Okay.
What is your vision for the Jewish people moving forward?
What is my vision for the Jewish people moving forward?
Yes.
My vision for the Jewish people is that we truly become what we have always meant to be, which is a light unto the nations. I think that the Jews were put here on earth with a mission to make the world a better place. We were put here for the act of tikkun olam, to repair the world, to fix the brokenness. And that starts internally with our own brokenness, but also not just inward facing at the Jewish challenges. I think that if the Jewish people can become the tip of the spear for doing good in the world and inspiring others to do good and to fix the brokenness, that will be a fulfillment of the messianic vision of why the Jewish people have a role to play on God's green earth.
Okay, final question. First of all, thank you for your time. I know you're extremely busy. You have a lot going on, and there's a lot of
Thank you for having me.
to do. How can, and ask this question, it's a rhetorical question, how can we make it more profitable to save the world and each other than to destroy it? That's my question. I want other people to answer. What does the Jewish world need now most, and why?
What does the Jewish world need now? Healing, love, Rahmanis, compassion, a little bit of grace for each other. I think the Jewish world needs, let me answer it in 2 ways. One, what we need from ourselves and each other is a little bit of grace and a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of love for each other right now, and not going into our corners, our partisan corners, our polarized corners, the Jews who support AOC and the Jews who don't support AOC. Like, we don't need that. We need more coming together. Again, this is the unity, not uniformity. So that's what I wish for us. What we need from the outside world is also a little bit of love and grace and compassion, and stop holding us to a double standard that you wouldn't hold to any other people. Like, recognize that when the Jewish state and the Jewish people are suffering from anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, attacks, hatred, that we have a right to stand up for ourselves, and don't hate us for not wanting to be in the shtetl anymore. Don't hate us for no longer being the shtetl Jew. We should never let our victimhood define our sense of peoplehood, Saul. I would love for the world to say to us, you're right, you haven't been treated fairly. Let's give you another look at this one. That's what I think we could use right now from the outside world.
I love it. Zach, thank you so much for your time. I also want to end with a blessing that Hashem should bless you with the courage to continue to lead a very diverse, wildly diverse community and create a safe space for Jews and non-Jews alike to come, feel safe, feel seen, connect, and that you've always been a leader who leads with heart and vulnerability, and that you should continue to do that because that really inspires your opening up, inspires other people to open up as well. Amen.
Thank you. Amen. Thank you, Saul. It's been great spending time with you.
Simcha, we'll see you on the next episode, and Hag Sameach.